Scalability becomes a concern when you're huge, and when you reach that point, it's going to be a very convenient problem to have. So buckle up, get to your first, 1,000 users, 100,000 users, then we can start talking about real scalability. I don't think we've ever done a rewrite specifically for the purpose of scalability. I don't think that has ever once come up. But we've done rewrites for the purpose of unmaintainability, where this code base is no longer working. But straight up scalability has never come up in my career that I can recall.
Welcome to SaaS That App, Building B2B Web Applications, the podcast where we share real-world stories, practical advice, and tech insights for those building or thinking about starting a tech-enabled business. I am your co-host, Aaron Marchbanks.
And I'm Justin Edwards. Each week we bring you the stories, strategies, and insights you need to build your SaaS or tech-enabled business smarter, not harder. Let's dive right in. Hello, everybody, and welcome to SaaS That App. My usual co-host Aaron has flown the coop for today, so I'm joined here by our Chief Innovation Officer, Daniel Cannon, here at Delta, and our number one developer extraordinaire, Nolan Alimonti. Many SaaS founders in the course of their journey ask themselves the question, is what I built worthwhile? Is it a steaming pile of garbage? Should I kill it with fire and rewrite it? There's a lot of things to consider in the decision to rewrite your software. There's a lot of things to consider, and the answer is often not straightforward. So to unpack that, I brought on my favorite two folks, and we're going to have an interesting discussion today where we cover rewrites and why to do them, and maybe even tell some stories about rewrites we've done that went well, and maybe some that didn't. So Daniel, Nolan, welcome to the pod.
Hey, how's it going? Always good to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having me back.
Yeah, absolutely. So from your experience, what are some things that you guys consider when advising a client to do a rewrite?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a challenge. Developers have a tendency of coming into a project and always wanting to rewrite it. No developer likes other developers' code. We all think everybody else's code stinks and our code don't stink, so to speak. I think in a lot of cases, it's actually not the right call from a business perspective, but it really depends. Some of the things I consider is like, A, how bad is the code base? Like, is this a disaster? 2, how much additional feature development are you doing? Are we just in a maintenance phase, or are you planning to build something massive and brand new? Because if you're going to build something massive and brand new, you probably want a really good foundation upon which to build it. And, and then 3rd is like, are you doing any kind of a major pivot? Is there something where you're kind of completely changing direction with things? Maybe you started building this thing as a direct mail service app, and now it's going to be a phone call app. And it's like, okay, well, you're doing something completely different. So now a rewrite makes sense because it's not even the same thing that you want. You shouldn't try to make a square block fit in a round peg. Is that the expression? Square peg fit in a round hole. There we go. So I think those are kind of the 3 things that I would consider.
Do you have anything to add to that, Nolan, or cases you've seen where the rewrite was the right thing to bite off?
Yeah, I mean, I think Daniel's statement that like a developer generally wants to start from scratch is probably true. And like that is usually my instinct, and I usually have to like make a concerted effort to kind of check that and not do that. It's a lot easier for us generally to kind of think about problem solving with a clean slate rather than like try to account for all the garbage that came before us. But yeah, I think the business case for a rewrite is like pretty unique. And I think there are a lot of requirements that need to be met before you actually even go down that path of consideration. It seems like we do often have clients who kind of have a V1 of an app. That V1 was completed and then left unchanged for a couple of years. But in that time, the business has continued to grow and maybe even evolve. And at a certain point, that V1 of the application just becomes kind of stale and doesn't really meet their needs anymore. We've done a lot of rewrites specifically for those business users, and that usually winds up being very successful because we can kind of factor in all of the lessons learned for V1 while still like adding on all these new enhancements and features. And we wind up with an application that both serves like the old business use cases as well as all the new ones.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's my favorite time to do a rewrite is when there's an existing application that's working okay, but there's either a big pivot going on or we want to change the fundamental technology for some reason to enable some new business thing. Like a good example would be adding a mobile app where we have a kind of a bespoke web application that was never set up with API functionality in mind, and adding one on is going to be a huge lift. We can take the existing app, which is good and does what it needs to do. It's great as a developer because you have these beautiful use cases of exactly how everything is supposed to work. It really cuts down on communication time with the client. And then you can kind of create a new application that meets the old application, migrate the data over, and then also this new thing that caused you to bite off the rewrite. So we've had a couple clients in that vein. Another case I've seen where rewrite does make sense, and all of this is with the statement that rewriting is usually not the right call. It's the exception. The fact that your code is clunky and people don't like working with it is inconvenient, and it doesn't make you feel great as a developer, but there's not a business case to clean up your code most of the time. But another case where it can make sense is if you have something that hasn't been maintained and it's so dated now that the work you're going to have to do to bring that up to speed and get it rehosted. And I'm thinking about updating off of something like VB, or you have an application that's been doing its job for 20 years and no one's ever touched it. It's like, well, yeah, we can bring that up to speed before you get kicked off your hosting, but the amount of work to do that is going to be very similar to a rewrite. So let's take this as a fresh beginning, and we can install new technologies. We can kind of bring the thing up to date in something that's a little bit more modern. And it's a similar amount of work to what you'd be paying to maintain the existing system. I have had a couple clients in that vein in my career, not too many. I can think of, I guess, one notable one. So scaling and not being able to scale is also a reason potentially for doing a rewrite. I guess, can you think of an instance of seeing that in the wild, Daniel?
Yeah, I mean, so that's something we always tell to startups when they come and work with us, especially small, early stage startups. Oftentimes, they're very concerned about scalability, and we need to build this in Scala. It's got scalable right in the name. Examples like that. And usually what we tell them is you're too small to worry about scalability. Scalability becomes a concern when you're huge. And when you reach that point, it's going to be a very convenient problem to have. So buckle up, get to your first, 1,000 users, 100,000 users. Then we can start talking about real scalability. I don't think we've ever done a rewrite specifically for the purpose of scalability. I don't think that has ever once come up. But we've done rewrites for the purpose of unmaintainability, where this code base is no longer working. But straight up scalability has never come up in my career that I can recall. Have you had anything like that, Nolan?
I don't think so. I've definitely encountered projects where the urge is strong because so many bad patterns and inefficiencies are so fundamentally baked into the code that sometimes I do wonder, would it just be faster to kind of scrap this and pick out the various pieces that I want to bring forward, but rewrite those inefficiencies from scratch? But we've never actually moved forward on that. I think that would be a really, really rare scenario.
I think we have done micro rewrites where we completely blew up and re-architected a component of an app or an area of an app, but blowing up an entire application for scalability.
Yeah, even a front end, right? We migrated across component libraries or kind of style frameworks. And sometimes that feels kind of like a rewrite, at least in the front end, but still fundamentally it's the same code base usually.
Yeah, I had one client who was in the IoT space where the initial architecture that was decided upon, this was not going to operate at the scale that they needed to move quickly into. This is related to a COVID pivot where they were going from something that wasn't contact tracing into contact tracing. And the amount of interactivity between their IoT devices was just so much more than they anticipated. And we had to kind of completely blow up what was existing and rewrite mostly all of it. But that wasn't their entire application. It was just that kind of communication piece. So I can think of that. So I guess you guys have both mentioned as developers, we come in and we have this tendency to want to rewrite because code is bad and it's not our code. So inherently, by definition, it's bad and these kinds of things. I think one reason where you might actually want to rewrite because of code quality issues is if you are either spending so much money on writing each individual feature because of bad patterns that it's kind of like making a big investment early on to avoid the death of 1,000 cuts later. That can be a good decision. Another thing that would go into that is if you're having a really hard time keeping talent around because your code base is so dated or it's in a bad piece of tech that people don't want to work in, or it's just miserable to work on. If you're actually having developer churn because your code base is so bad, that may be one of the better reasons to do a rewrite. And I think that's maybe a little bit hard because it's difficult to tell if that's the cause of developer churn or if it's something else.
When a code base is bad, there are a bunch of reasons for that. I mean, oftentimes it is just straight up bad developers. There are a lot of bad developers out there in the wild. I've been shocked throughout my career how many just awful developers I've worked with. There is no licensing and bonding process for a developer. Anybody can call themselves a developer, throw up a flag, get hired to do that, and you would be amazed. You wouldn't let somebody work on your house's electrical system who doesn't know how electricity works, but people do it all the time with software for their company. They spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it's a mess. So one is that there are a lot of bad developers out there, but another really common cause is a lack of clear vision and clear plan when building this thing out originally. And so I think this is one where you as a founder really need to sit back and think about what is going to be different this time. What has actually changed? If we're doing a rewrite and we're doing the same thing that we did last time, you're going to end up in the same pickle that you're already in. And without naming names, we have a client who we kind of went through this. They came to us with a mess of a code base, horrible code base. I mean, it's just absolutely unmaintainable. And we basically rewrote the code base. And then after doing the full rewrite, it was pivot this way, pivot that way, pivot. And it becomes a tangled mess, and it's really hard to stay on top of, especially if you're not going to allocate the budget to do the maintenance, to clean up the technical debt problems that you create while programming. It's a very normal thing where you call this technical debt, and we're going to put it off for the future, but you have to allocate budget to actually deal with that. And so we have a project right now that we did this full rewrite on, and it's now kind of turned into a tangled mess. I mean, I still think it's maintainable. I wouldn't rewrite it, but they're now off working with a different team, and they're rewriting it, and they're going in a totally different direction. Like their company has completely shifted and they're doing something else. And it's unfortunate when you see that happen. But, so I think you do have to look at yourself as a founder and say, am I the problem or is it my developer who's the problem? Because I'd say it's almost like a 50-50 thing. Sometimes it really is just a lack of vision.
But I think that's a super important point, is that a rewrite is not going to solve debt at the product level. Like if you're still not sure what your product should be, or if there's still those types of questions that need to be answered, a rewrite is not going to solve those problems for you. Like the rewrite is strictly a technical solution, right? Like, or a maintainability solution, like maybe cost saving. But if you're carrying over baggage from a product that is like not solidified or that is still kind of in flux, like you're just going to bring all those same problems into your code base and you're going to hit the same issues.
100%. And I mean, I think you need to decide, have you found product market fit? Because that's not something that a rewrite's going to solve. You'd be amazed. People will buy awful products that are technically terrible, but they'll show up and pay for it. And so if you see that, if you have people paying to use your product, well, maybe it actually is a software problem and you need to rewrite the software. But if nobody's showing up to buy it, if you don't have people knocking down your door being like, we want to use this thing, but it doesn't work right, you probably need to reevaluate the product case. Do you have a product market fit problem?
The most successful rewrites we've had were projects where the client knew exactly what they needed. There was no ambiguity about what the output should be. And we built exactly what they asked us for initially. And there was very little pivot within that process. And those rewrites always wind up being great.
I think that's one of the subcases of when rewriting is great. So maybe you were still finding product market fit with a product and using a development team to do it, which is probably good to avoid, but maybe you didn't avoid it. And so now you've had one code base that's been 5 different things as you've gone through a series of pivots and really tried to get your business figured out. That code base is probably not going to be very nice to work in because you can't start off with a company that's supposed to do one thing and then pivot 6 times and have it doing something else. And so if you've gone through a series of pivots like that and you've had a piece of software while you did it, you're more likely to be a good candidate for a rewrite because your developers had to bubblegum and paperclip the software and to do like 10 different things. It wasn't designed and all that kind of cruft got dragged along with it. I think if you've arrived at a point where you have product market fit and you're not floundering anymore, wait a while. Assess if your business case is still changing. And if it's not, that's a great time to say, like, this is the new product that we need. And let's go ahead and clean up all this mess that I created trying to get to this point at this time, now that we're kind of not floundering any longer.
I also think it's really important to consider when you're doing that rewrite, what the mission is at the outset. Like, are you going to replace it with exactly what you have, but better? Or is this like a vision shift? Are you doing something new with it? Because I've had this a lot of times where you embark on the rewrite and the gold standard is the application that exists. And we're going to basically create a new application that's exactly the same as the old one, does all the same things, it just does it better. Because that's a very different kind of rewrite than the whole, we're going to redesign it and reimagine it. And when you get confused about that in the middle of the project, it creates all sorts of problems. Is this the gold standard or is this not the gold standard? Are we going in a different direction? And if we're going in a different direction, what is that direction?
Yeah, I think maybe that speaks to like, if you're rewriting, you should rewrite with a purpose. You shouldn't just rewrite because it sounds like an initiative to have for this quarter or for this year. We're rewriting our code base because we can't scale it correctly, or we're rewriting our code base because we're going to get kicked off of our hosting and it's going to be more expensive to update our code base than re-implement it in something more modern. Or we're rewriting because we can't keep a developer on staff because our code base is so miserable. Those are all great reasons to embark upon a rewrite if you're going to, but rewriting for rewriting's sake is maybe a great thing to do if you have many staff developers that are bored. They'll be happy with it, but it may not make a lot of sense for your business.
Another important thing to consider is that, especially when kind of moving a project across teams, is that even though a code base may be extremely like gross and kind of ugly to deal with as a new developer, sometimes those like really gross edges carry like hard-won lessons about the business logic. And that like, even though I want to rewrite that and start that from scratch, there might actually be a really good reason that it is so ugly and kind of gross to work with. And by rewriting it with a new team, you lose all that historical knowledge and they may just make the same decisions that the previous team made. And you might wind up kind of in a similar situation.
I think that is a great point. And, we have a couple of these systems that have extremely complicated business logic. And oftentimes that business logic is not really documented. The documentation for it is the code. It is this gross, gnarly, awful query that somebody wrote that you look at as a developer and you're like, blow that up. Let's write it again. But the reality is you don't actually understand what the query is doing. There are definitely parts of some code bases that are just, we just leave them in their sacrosanct little hovel and we don't touch them because when you touch them, bad things happen. Like that. There are code bases that are like that.
Yeah, we have a very messy piece of code that we maintain that relates to monthly billing for a subscription service. And every single month, that thing charges 6 figures worth of credit cards. It's not the prettiest code base on the world. We try to maintain it and stuff, but that's, like you were saying, Daniel, that's kind of like holy grail. It's like, this is doing $100,000 a month in credit card transactions. The code is a mess, and we're just going to let it mellow until something breaks and we have to fix it. But I'm not proactively trying to maintain that because I don't want to break something that's been working for many years in the name of code quality. The client doesn't have a business reason to change that, so just leave it alone.
I'd say that is another huge reason to reconsider a rewrite and don't do a rewrite. If you have a piece of software that's generating a lot of revenue and it's got a lot of users, it's going to be really hard to do the rewrite. The rewrites are very easy if nobody's using the damn thing. That's really easy. It's like, great, blow it up, start again, we'll rebuild it. But when you're in that situation where you need to transition people from the old software to the new software, especially when they're processing hundreds of thousands of dollars of credit card transactions every month, this becomes a huge headache that has to be planned for very carefully. And oftentimes in those cases, even though it's very unsatisfying, the right answer is to go in and try to plug the holes in the dam and get the thing working, as opposed to trying to blow it up and replace it.
As a technical aside here, we're going to get a little bit nerdy for just a minute. Daniel and Nolan and I were all involved in a rewrite where there were a lot of users and it was in a elevated security compliance situation. And we also made the determination that a rewrite was 100% necessary for scalability reasons of maintainability and a fundamental problem with how the initial implementation was done. Establishing a new foundation to launch a lot of new features was also a component. We actually built a transitional API. There's also a mobile app in play that we were not rewriting at the same time. We built a transitional API, which literally just sat between the mobile app and the existing application and passed requests back and forth. Then we stood up a new piece of software, which was the new rebuild, the rewrite. Then little by little, we started cleaving functionality out of the old system into the new system and then updating that transition API to send requests to the new system instead of the old system. It was extremely messy and it added a ton of expense to the client. But they got to keep their system online, earning money and working the whole time. And they never went down, including their mobile app, same users, same mobile app, same experience. So it was the right thing to do. But just to Daniel's point that it added a ton of expense to their rewrite project. Cool. So guys, on the more positive front or to be a little bit more like proactive, like what are some tips you would give to founders to help them avoid being in a position where they're considering a rewrite?
The rewrite is strictly a technical solution to technical problems. Like keeping that in the forefront of your mind is super important as an entrepreneur or if somebody who's building a product. The rewrite is not going to solve fundamental problems about the software that you want to build. And it's not going to like correct decisions that you made bad decisions on in the past. So like approaching every problem as if rewriting is going to solve it is not the right move.
Yep, totally agreed. I think a rewrite should never be your plan A. You should never go out and build software with the plan that we're going to rewrite this in 5 years. You know, that said, you also don't want to dramatically overbuild it. So there's kind of pros and cons. You know, I think generally the strategy to avoid a rewrite is to keep track of your technical debt. And if you're not doing that, if you're working with a developer, ask your developer, what's the technical debt? What's hanging out there? What are the nasty things that you're doing? Because we all do nasty stuff. In the furtherance of making things happen, we create this technical debt, which are things that need to be refactored in the future, queries that we know are going to be slow, but they work now with this data. But once actual users are in there, it's probably going to run really slow. A lot of things get deferred to the future, like pagination, you know, so when you have a table, you know, when you're working with test data, you've got 10 things in the table and it runs really quick and it doesn't take very long. And so you might make a note, hey, we're going to need to paginate this at some point. Because once you get up to 100,000 things in that table, now the table just doesn't even load. So you paginate it, meaning you break it up into small little chunks so people can go through page by page by page. These are things that will need to be done at some point. So keep track of those as you're building it out. Keep it in a spreadsheet, keep it in Jira, keep it somewhere, and allocate time in every single sprint to be like, hey, let's tackle a little bit of technical debt as we go. And it's not going to feel super fun at the time. You're like, why am I allocating 10 hours a week to go and solve things, fix things that are already working. In fact, I'm probably going to break things in the process of fixing this technical debt. So it's going to feel very counterproductive at the time. But what doesn't happen is if you don't stay on top of this technical debt, it accumulates. And then one day you're stuck in a situation of, oh, I can't even deploy this application anymore because there's no, modern operating system that will be able to run it. Or you have a massive security breach or who knows what. It's kind of like not maintaining your house. And then one day during a rainstorm, your entire house floods, so you don't want that to happen. So stay on top of it. As you have a little leak, you got to patch the leak.
Yeah. And sorry, kind of surprisingly, we were joined by my emotional support pit bull, Wilbur. So hi, Wilbur. Welcome to the pod.
Hello, Wilbur.
He decided to take a nap behind me. Yeah. So I guess I have three main recommendations for folks to avoid ever needing to do a rewrite. And I think 1 and 2 rip off of what Nolan and Daniel said in order. So the first one is don't find product market fit with a code base. Find it with a prototype. Find it with a put together solution to prototype something you're going to throw away, because developers are expensive, and having a piece of software that you pivot in the actual software, like that's to be avoided if you can. So be really sure that you got product market fit before you launch into a product launch, even for like an MVP. It's just expensive to iterate in software. It's much better to iterate in Figma or XD or whatever you're using. The second thing is maintain your code. To Daniel's point, you can't stop spending on your software. You can go down to a maintenance budget. You can cut the amount of money that you're spending, but you do have to continue to put money behind maintaining and developing your software, even if that's just running updates to keep the lights on. Every year, every couple of quarters, we go through and we find everybody who's out of date. We let them know, like, hey, you're about to fall off of end of life, and we need to kind of update stuff. So we need to get you to get some money together to pay us to keep your software up to date. And if you're running a piece of software and you're not getting that message, you don't have an active development team, dig into that now, because the pain's only going to get worse, and you may end up in the spot where it's like it's better to rewrite the software than it is to upgrade it, which you want to avoid. And then the last thing that I would say is, especially if you have a regular development team, is give them time to pay down technical debt. It's going to make your developers happy. It's going to make your code base more maintainable. We didn't talk about that specifically yet, but I think if you do cleave off a small budget to let developers take care of the dragons in the code base to pay down that technical debt, you just really kind of true up that foundation and that base, and it leaves you a better place to kind of launch from. And even be open to the fact that that might cause bugs for real users that you have to then pay to fix. It's worth the investment just to get that code base into a stable spot. All right, guys. So story time. What's your favorite rewrite? Tell me about it a little bit. Run me through it.
We've had some really good ones. There's one that we're doing right now. I don't know if it's my favorite rewrite, but I think it's one of the more impactful rewrites that we've done. It's also one of the more complicated rewrites that we've done. So this was an application that was built for a school system. I won't name any names here, but it's built for a school system, and it handles a lot of their internal processes. And their internal processes are deceptively complicated. You think, school district, how hard could this be? We do stuff that's fintech. We do stuff that's healthcare. How hard could a school district be? And so they came to us with this application that was kind of in shambles. It wasn't really working. People were able to do what they needed to do, but not well. And we worked with it for a little bit, and we're eventually just like, guys, this is not going to be long-term sustainable. I don't even know how to update the PHP version on this at this point. I mean, it's a miracle this thing is still limping along on the server that it's running on, and I don't even know necessarily how we're going to pull the code off and get it running somewhere else. I mean, it was one of these kind of bad situations. They got some money together and we started working with us on a rewrite. And I think we've got them in a much better place than they were before. When we got just rave reviews from people when we initially rolled this thing out about how much better it was. But that said, it was not exactly the smoothest process. It was not as smooth as I had hoped. And a lot of that was just because we did not understand the complexity of the business logic. Some of the things we talked about before where it's like, oh, there's this query and it looks gnarly and awful. Well, let's blow that up and start over. Sometimes there are reasons that this thing is so complicated. We also had a really big challenge during this rewrite that one of the people who was kind of the primary visionary for this project left. So she left the organization mid-rewrite, and it left us with somebody new coming in. And the new person who came in had brilliant ideas about how to do things better and was excellent to work with, but it led to us rewriting things that we had rewritten in the middle of the project. The budget spiraled out of control. They figured out how to come up with funding for it, but it certainly wasn't our ideal real thing. This thing wound up costing about 3 times what we originally estimated, and we're usually pretty on the point with our estimates. And, kind of the reasons for that was this change that happened in the middle of the project and just the complexity of the logic, which was not immediately apparent when we started on the rewrite. So it's been a journey. I think we've got them in a really good place. I think the rewrite was absolutely the right decision. I think they're very happy with it, but it was not a smooth and seamless process by any means. And especially when you're dealing with a large organization, especially a large organization of people who are not particularly technically inclined, it can be very challenging to roll out something new and be like, hey, you're going to have to use this new system. And then you get support emails like, hey, my 4-letter password is no longer working. Like, we actually require you to have a 7-character password now. This is like very, very, very minimum requirements.
Cool. How about you, Nolan? What's your favorite rewrite you've worked on?
My favorites are always the one where the successful ones, obviously. And I think the most successful one we've had was a company that is in the meal service and like catering industry. This was an instance where I think they had a legacy app that was largely unmaintained for years. And then they kind of came to us, talked about extending it and enhancing it. And we wound up deciding that a rewrite probably just made more sense. The client knew exactly what they needed. They had learned a lot of lessons with that legacy app. And we were able to build a V2 that I think works a lot better, that the client enjoys using. And I think it's probably one of the more successful rewrites we've done. I chalk that up mostly to just the client understanding what they needed up front and really having a clear vision of what the application should be.
Yeah, the person we had an opportunity to work with on that project was very, very good. And he was a new member to the organization. Between the original build out happened, that was being hosted with us. I came into the project when basically they were trying to get off of our hosting and figure out how to transfer data and get things out of our ecosystem into theirs. And I stepped in and I said, yeah, absolutely, we can help you with that. Here's the steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here's the process. Here's how we do it. And that person was just like, would you guys like to rewrite this for us? Because we're going to work with somebody else to rewrite it. I said, well, I'll certainly take a bid at it. We know how the system works. We already have the data, so that'll make those parts simpler. But that person was new to their team when we started working with him, and he just had a lot of clarity about what that product was supposed to do and what it was supposed to be, including seeing very far into the future for things that have actually come to fruition subsequently. This is from years back. That person saw where this was going and was like, we need to be able to support this in the future. We need to be able to support this in the future. And they just added a brand new line of business, and they would not have been able to do that in the old system. The new system is built in such a way that bolting this new line of business onto the existing application in a way that was like seamless and made sense was relatively easy, which is mostly a testament to Nolan's architecture, but also to that gentleman's vision in terms of where his company was going. We did do right for a person who had a business with a full product and it didn't have any users and it wasn't very successful. And they wanted to fundamentally reimagine how their product worked and how people engaged with it, and also to add a mobile app to it. And it didn't make sense to bolt a mobile app API onto their existing code base. So we took the opportunity to kind of lift and shift out of something older and then build something that had an API from the start so we could work with mobile apps. And the web version of it ended up being just an admin interface, and the whole way the users engage with the app is via mobile apps. So I think I gave that kind of example earlier, but it didn't make sense to try to bolt an API out of this legacy system. We just wanted to pull the data over and reorganize and bolt an API onto it at that point.
Are we talking about the same relationship app?
Yeah, I was in the relationship counseling space, yeah.
So that was actually an example of a rewrite that I loved because it was a total reimagining. And, it was like, A, we got to replace something that was bad, that was poorly implemented. But B, we also got to come up with something that was like beautiful. I mean, that is a gorgeous, gorgeous app, and it was not gorgeous before. And so that was actually a really fun process. We got to work with the designer, and we got to ideate on it and go back and forth and come up with themes and new logos and new user flows. And, and at the end of it, I think we wound up with an app that was way better than there was before. So it wasn't just a rewrite, it was a complete repositioning of the app. And that was a lot of fun. So that was actually, I think, an example of a rewrite that I enjoyed. Most rewrites are a little gnarly, but that one was actually a lot of fun.
I love rewriting. I think it's a lot of fun because you get to kind of fix all the mistakes that were made and take all of your learnings and kind of roll it all up into like one new shiny product and say like, after everything we've been through, we have this. And I really appreciate that. But to your point, Daniel, I think that may be our most beautiful mobile app we've ever worked on in terms of just visually. It's a very attractive app, and user experience on it is pretty decent. At some point, they have to collect a lot of data, so it's hard to make that engaging and fun. But it's a beautiful app and it works really well. So that was a fun one to work on also. Awesome. Well, I think that we've covered a bunch of reasons to rewrite or things to think about when you're considering one. Talked about some steps to avoid being in the position where you need to do a rewrite. told a couple of war stories from the trenches. Do you guys have anything else to add before we sign off for the day?
No, I guess I'll just reiterate, I don't think a rewrite is usually the right answer. If you come to me and I tell you that you need to rewrite it, it's bad. You need to rewrite it. It's usually in pretty bad shape. I think the big things to consider when you're doing a rewrite are like, how bad is this application? Is it really that bad? How painful is this rewrite going to be? And really press your developer for honest, truthful answers, because developers are going to want to rewrite. And so you need to, really get down to brass tacks of what is going to be involved, not only in the reimplementation and the rewrite, but in the rollout. What kinds of processes are going to be involved to migrate our existing users, migrate our data, migrate our payment systems, all of that kind of stuff could wind up being way more costly and time consuming than the rewrite itself. So get clarity on that from the get-go and have a good vision through the rewrite. Have a good reason why you're rewriting and stick to that vision and come back to it. When you're 6 months into the rewrite, don't all of a sudden change your mind. Go back to like, what was our game plan? Why are we doing this? Let's stay the course.
Yeah, I think it's super solid. Like, fundamentally understand why you are rewriting and be certain that that is the correct solution. Your users don't see the code, right? So they don't care what it's written in. So you really need to be certain that the rewrite is the right choice if you're going to go down that path.
Yep. I think that fundamentally, like, if a rewrite is the right call, it's going to be showing up on your bottom line in some way. If your app is going to be turned off, that's going to hit your revenues. If you can't keep a developer on staff, that's going to hit your revenues at some point. If you can't scale, that's going to be a problem for growing your revenues. So I guess maybe that's a little bit of a dry business stick way of looking at it. But yeah, at some point, like, biting off a rewrite is a large, expensive endeavor and a solid business reason for even considering it. So if that's you and you are considering a rewrite, they're my favorite projects. So please give us a call.
We're really good at it.
I hate it. So call them. I like dealing with the messy, grungy.
Awesome. Well, that's been rewriting when to do it, when not to do it. It's been another great week and fun time on SaaS That App. Thank you, Daniel and Nolan, for joining us. And we will catch you guys next week in the next episode. Cheers.
Peace. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for cruising along with us on SaaS That App. We hope you grabbed some insights that were inspiring, actionable, or at least entertaining.
If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review.
Until next time, keep building, keep growing, and keep those apps sassy.